Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. Class, today we will go to topic 2, data model. First of all, we will look at the objectives of the chapter. So if you go through the objectives, you can see there's a few things important here. The first thing is about data models. Okay, the next things that I want to highlight is business rules. And those two are very important for this chapter. Okay, we will. Okay, so data model here, it mentioned that data models is a simple representation. Yeah, representation. Um, in the next slide, I will explain more about data models. What is data models? But about the importance of data model, I want you to read the notes in lecture attachment, page 2. Okay, if we look at models, what is models? Models is representation, and it is smaller scale, yeah, than the original. And also, apart from that, when we talk about model, it is also something for you to follow or imitate. So, meaning that data model is something that will represent your data or the system. Yeah. So database today is we will learn a technique of modeling your database. So how do you represent your database before you actually build your actual database? Yeah. All right. So there are four building blocks for data models. So if you want to remember um, these four building blocks, my approach is I use this is A-E-R, which is an ear, yeah, an ear, a human ear, and then you have a C attached to the ear as an earring. So you can easily remember the basic building blocks for data model is EAR, ear, entity, attribute, relationship, and then the constraint. Yeah, ignore the drawing, which is not so beautiful, but the main thing is I show you how, yeah, one technique of how to remember the four basic building blocks. Okay, we'll continue about entity. Yeah, entity is anything about which data are to be collected and stored. Yeah, meaning that the data can be collected and stored in an entity. For example, a person. It can be a customer, a student, patient, a place. So entity can be block or room, a thing, an event, and so on. Yeah, more description about entity is an object that can exist in a database and can be a single thing, person, a place, or an object. Now, for example, if we have ABC College, yeah, as a database, so the entity in that database can be student and also can be course, because we will have data, yeah, on student and also data on course. Okay, next look at attribute. Attribute is a characteristic of an entity. Okay, let us look at an example. It can be a characteristic or description of an entity. So for example, just now we have two entity. The first one is entity student. So entity student, what can describe student? So student can be described by their student ID, by their name, and also address. So this is how we write an attributes. Yeah, the attributes for the entity student and attributes for the entity course. All right. Next is we will look at relationship. So relationship actually describe association among entities. So if you want to connect one entity to another entity, you use relationship, and there are three type of entity. Sorry, three type of relationship, one to many, many to many, and one to one, and it is bidirectional. Okay, so we look at an example first. For example, just now we have ABC College, we have student entity and also course entity. So we have a, a relationship. Okay, this is a relationship between student and course. Yeah, and the type of relationship is as shown here. It is many to many, or M colon M or M colon N. Yeah. So we look back previous at the slide. Okay. It is explained in the previous slide. Okay. Constraint in bahasa Melayu, kekangan. Yeah. What are the restriction of the data that can be represented by the attributes, yeah, by the attributes in the entity. Okay, for example, GPA, when you're talking about GPA, the minimum is 0.00, maximum is 4.00, and other constraint, if you look here, is it must be in number, and it must be in 2 decimal place. Yeah. Okay, and for example, salary, okay, between 6,000 and 350,000, and so on. Okay, so those constraints regarding the entity and regarding the attributes. Okay, the next important thing is business rule. So business rule is actually descriptions of policies, procedures, and principles of an organization. Later, we will see how we want to build a business rule. So before we want to build database, we need to decide what are the database, and then what entity do we have in that database. After we have decided these are the entities, so what are the attributes in the entities, and then we look at the business rules. Or you can also start with the business rules, and by looking at the business rules, you will be able to identify the entity and also the attribute. Okay. For example, here, a customer may generate many invoices. An invoice is generated by only one customer. A training session cannot be scheduled for fewer than 10 employees or for more than 30 employees. Okay, so if we look at here, we have entity. Yeah, so let us use blue for entity. So the entity here is customer and also invoice in the first business rule. The second business rule, also invoice and customer. The third business rule is training session and also employees. Okay, uh, relationship. Okay, we use yellow here for relationship, so we can have one, two, many. We have one, two, one, and we have one, two, because this is more than one, so this is also one, two, many. Okay, and then the constraint, this shows the constraint of the third business rules. Okay, let us move on. So where can we find business rules? Meaning that you want to build a database and to look at the business rules, you can look at these documents. Okay, so what is a business rule? Business rule must be in writing. So in what we have seen just now, business rule is in sentences, that contains the entity, the attribute, and also the constraints. Okay, the importance of business rules, you can look through here to standardize as a communication tool to understand, and as a guideline, yeah, when you want to develop your database. Okay, translating business rule into data model component. This is in your lecture attachment, page 3. Do read the lecture attachment. And here it mentioned about um, when we have an entity is a noun, a customer, invoice, relationship, you use a verb, doing, perbuatan, ya. A customer generate invoice, a student attend a class, ya. So it must be bi-directional, meaning that you can explain from customer to invoice, and also invoice to customer, yeah, the other way around. Okay, evolution of data models. Okay, I will not spend too much time here. These are histories, yeah, on how data model evolve. Yeah, starting with a hierarchical model. I hope you read it at your own time. Yeah, you can see hierarchy. Okay, and then followed by these are the advantage and disadvantages of this hierarchical data model, followed by the network data model, which is you can see it branch out, yeah, rather than in a hierarchy type of condition. Okay, after the network model, we are going to relational model. Relational model is some sort of the data model that we want to look at, yeah, in this course. But the in relational model, it starts by using table, and then um, in this course, we will be looking at the entity relationship model. Yeah, entity relationship model, ERM, or also we refer to it at the same time as ERD, entity relationship diagram. Okay, the entity, as we mentioned just now, is something that can hold data in the database, and it can be student, for example, and it can be represented. There are two ERD model, yeah, chain and also crow's foot. Yeah, usually we will be using the crow's foot note. Okay, the entity. Okay, if you have a table, yeah, you will have the table as an entity. So the entity itself is a table. Okay, and each entity is described by a set of attributes. Yeah, so attributes is the column in the table, and then relationship will be the connectivity between one table to another. Okay, if we look at here, we have two notation, which is the chain notation and also the crow's foot notation. Yeah, so in this subject, ICT200, we will concentrate more on the crow's foot. Why is it called crow's foot? If you look at this part, okay, here we have this. Yeah, so at the end here, it looks like a crow's foot. Yeah, kaki gagak. Yeah, kaki burung. Okay, so we have crow's foot notation. So we have the connectivity, one to many. This is chain. So in crow's foot, one will look like this. Many will look like this. Yeah. So one to many. This is many to many. Yeah, many to many. We call it MN. Relationship name will be written in the middle. Okay. For example, here employee, learns skill. Yeah, so the word learns will be written on the relationship line. Okay, this is another notation, UML class diagram notation. Okay, this is the fifth type of data model, oriented model. Okay, the other model, ERDMS, big data, no SQL, yeah, are all example of data model. Okay, these are the data models that we have mentioned now. Okay, these are the terminology. Okay, the disadvantages of the data model. Okay, you can read. Okay, and the summary of a data model. Each new data model capitalize on the shortcomings of the previous model. Shortcomings is the disadvantages, ya, ataupun kalau dalam bahasa Melayu, kekurangan. Alright, uh, degree of abstraction. Okay, we will not explain this. I want you to read through on your own time, because I want to explain. Okay, let me show you. I want to explain. Okay, here. Okay, this is what I want to explain. Write the business rules that are reflected in the ERD. Here, remember, ERD is entity relationship diagram. So in this ERD, okay, you can see how many entity. We have 4 entity. Yeah, so the entity is department, sales rep, invoice, and customer. And we have 3 relationship, yeah, that connects the 4 entity. All right, so when we want to look at the business rule, let's say we want to concentrate on one relationship to write a business rule. Okay, so we want to look at invoice to customer. So invoice generates customer. So the first thing when we want to do or to write business rules, first of all, we need to identify the entity. Yeah, identify the entity. So now we have invoice and customer, and then identify the relationship between the invoice and customer. So here generates. Yeah, and also the type of the relationship is one to many. Yeah, after that, let's start by building the business rule. So build 2 sentences regarding the relationship. The first sentence is customer to invoice. Yeah, customer to invoice. So we say customer. The customer is the uh, name of the entity. Here generates. So generates is here. Invoice. Okay, look at the relationship from customer to invoice. Yeah, it is one to many. Yeah, by looking at this. Okay, so the first business rule, yeah, will be written as one, or you can use each customer generates many invoice, because the relationship is one to many. Okay, let us look at the second sentence, or the second business rule that can be generated through this relationship. So we look at the opposite side. Yeah, just now we look from customer to invoice. Now we look at from invoice to customer. So here we have the name of the entity. Invoice is generated by customer. Yeah, so we look at uh, the relationship. The relationship is many to one. Yeah, this is many. This is one. So we concentrate on the one on this end. Yeah. So we can say each invoice is generated by one customer, yeah, because the n is 1. uh, okay, now the second example, convert to simple ERD using cross foot. Yeah, so just now we go from ERD to business rule. Yeah, so now we look at business rule to ERD. Okay, so we look at the first two example. Okay, let's take a set of business rule. So one publisher can publish one or more books. Each book is published by one publisher. Okay, so first of all, we identify the entity. So the entity is publisher and books. The second business rule also mentioned book and publisher. Okay, so we identify the entity, publisher, and book. Now we look at the relationship. The name of the relationship is publish. Name of the relationship is publish. And then we look at the type of relationship by looking at in each business rule, you look at the second entity. Yeah, because the first entity or the entity at the beginning of each business rule, yeah, you will always use one or each, one publisher, each book. But at the end of the business rule, yeah, if you look carefully, you will see here more books, yeah, one or more, meaning that because they have you have more here, so this is many. One publisher is one. Yeah, so meaning that, yeah, your relationship will be publisher and book entity. The name of the relationship is published, and then you have one to many. Yeah, more book, more book there. Okay, so that's all, yeah, that I want to cover in topic 2. So the main thing for you in this topic 2 is the ability to know data model, in whereby in our chapter we will be using ERD, yeah, specifically uh, cross-foot ERD. So we have discussed about the business rule and also ERD. So you should be able to derive ERD from business rule. And but if you are given an ERD, you should be able to derive the business rule, yeah, from the ERD. Okay, so that's all for lecture today. So it's a very I try to minimize the time of this video. So hopefully you get the most out of it. Okay, assalamualaikum, and thank you very much.